Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Source Material Comics podcast. That is correct. You know, I said, look, we need to talk about She-Hulk. No, I didn't. I think Evan Bevins threw this at me. So I'm looking for something to talk about. What do we need to talk about? And Evan came up with a few ideas, and this one stuck out. And I'm sure a lot of it had to do with the fact that we have an ongoing She-Hulk series on Disney Plus right now that I'm enjoying. So Evan Bevins is here to let us know why we are talking the Sensational She-Hulk this evening.
Okay, well, it's kind of a long and winding road.
All right, then.
Not really. I was going for my my blog that I'll plug later, asterisk51.blogspot.com.
Wasn't much later.
Yeah. Well, you know, I don't know. You could kick me off, or we could lose internet. You know.
Oh, right. You never know.
Got to get it in while I can. I was looking for something to tie in with She-Hulk, and I remembered a long time ago I picked up Sensational She-Hulk number 12, which featured She-Hulk the movie.
Yes.
And this was after She-Hulk had been brought back as more of a comedy-driven title. You know, I know everybody always thinks of She-Hulk as a deadly serious character, judging from the online reaction to some of the humorous moments in the show. But yeah, it turns out she's always been kind of fun. And so I remembered this issue. I remember John Byrne being associated with this, but it turned out that issue was written by Peter David. And if you want funny comics, Peter David is, you know, one of the top guys to turn to. Mm-hmm. So I was curious if this was just a fill-in or what. So I started looking at some other issues before and after this, and I found out that, lo and behold, Peter David was doing a fill-in, and the regular writer that followed him was none other than Steve Gerber.
This is a creator that you've talked highly of him before. I've heard other people I've talked comics with just go on about how much they've enjoyed his work, but I honestly don't think I had read anything that I remember him. Let's try it this way, because I know I sent it to you, and I was like, I think this might be the first time I've ever read Steve Gerber. And then we started looking at the books he wrote, and sure enough, there were some titles in there that I'd recognized. But the reputation that precedes Steve Gerber is humor. And I think a lot of that is because he's tied with a very important humorous character in the Marvel universe. But I had never read anything. I'd watched the movie, but I'd never read anything with that character in it. So Steve Gerber, tell us about Steve Gerber.
Well, of course, you're referring to his ties to Marvel's Kiss comic.
How did you know?
That is something he wrote, and it did cross over with the character you are talking about, Howard the Duck.
Yes.
And the Howard the Duck movie has its moments, most of them involving Leah Thompson. But if all you know of Howard the Duck is the movie, you don't know Howard the Duck. One of my favorite comic series I've ever read. Absolutely hilarious. Talking duck, smack dab in the middle of the Marvel universe. Steve Gerber, who has also written a lot of classic superhero stuff, had a great run on Marvel 2-in-1 that I adored. You may have read some of his stuff and not realized it in the Ultraverse. I think he kicked off Exiles and Sludge.
All characters I recognize, yes.
At some point, and I should have done a little more research on this, but he wanted a little more control and ownership of Howard the Duck than Marvel wanted to give, and so he had left for a while, as I understand it, not on the best of terms. And what I got excited about when I saw, that Steve Gerber had written She-Hulk, so I'm always happy to find some more Steve Gerber stuff I haven't read. He started with issue 13, and then issue 14, which is where we're going to start, features She-Hulk teaming up with none other than Howard the Duck. And as near as I can tell, that's the first time he returned to Howard since he left the original series.
Oh, no kidding! Wow.
And Howard is one of those characters that, I mean, he pops up from time to time. You know, he's kind of a cult favorite. You know, even before I read anything with Howard the Duck, I was just happy that Howard the Duck existed, that something this ridiculous was running around in the Marvel universe.
Right.
So he's appeared in other things. Chip Zdarsky did a great revival series with him, where we talked about his Daredevil. And then Mark and I, while you were essential, or even more essential than usual, did Deadpool the Duck, where a teleportation accident merged Deadpool and Howard, and they faced off against their mutual nemesis, Dr. Bong.
Yes.
Nothing to do with marijuana, folks. Get your minds out of there. I've heard several people say that Howard the Duck isn't really Howard the Duck unless Steve Gerber's writing him. And
Interesting.
there's some definite trademark Gerber humor and more in this storyline that we're going to talk about. In fact, Gerber, who has since passed away, might argue that most stories with Howard the Duck that weren't written by him don't feature Howard the Duck. I still got to read this one, but there was an unofficial Marvel Image crossover where it can be argued Gerber stole Howard back from Marvel. I believe our friend Chris Sheehan did a deep dive on that. I've got the issues, but only read one of them and did not realize the significance at the time. So that's on my to read list at some point. But as to how we got to doing this, after I stumbled on Gerber writing She-Hulk and Howard, I know you and I were talking about what we should do and if we should do anything about with She-Hulk. And I said, well, I'm getting ready to read these. And you said, well, hey, why don't we do that?
Yeah, all right.
So I said, hey, Jesse, I know you are Mr. Synopsis, but I am writing about these issues anyway, so I will have them synopsized.
I love it.
So why don't I just adapt that and run my mouth a little more than usual this evening?
Oh man, do you know how much pressure that takes off of me? It's like, I've done this show so much, and I'm 90. I would probably say 99.5% of these shows that I was on, I've done all the synopsis. And now having you do this, it's like I'm a guest on my own show. I love it. It's going to be fun.
And the best part is all I had to do was condense what I'd already written. So it wasn't even that much extra work. There wasn't even any extra work for me.
So let me just talk real quick about my experience with the Sensational She-Hulk. Did not collect any of it. I knew she was a character out there, and throughout the years, obviously, she had probably run in some of the stuff that I was reading in the later 2000s, especially like Civil War. I think I'd seen her pop up in there, but I wasn't reading her in the 90s. I knew a little bit about her fourth wall breaking, that being a thing. And of course, it seemed like a lot of times there's going to be some tattered clothes on a very pretty woman in the book, which is it's mostly Jennifer Walters trying to cover up because she had turned to She-Hulk or something. I mean, when we open this book, she's already like trying to keep her shirt on because it's torn to shreds. As a young boy, that's stuff that you're going to probably be aware of, even though I wasn't picking this book up. You're going to see that on the covers of these books. And that's one thing about the She-Hulk book that I remember the most is usually the covers. I think they just shared the one about the jump rope because of all the flack that she was getting on the show, or that how they're portraying her on the show. It's like, I mean, it's not far from what we used to get in the comic books. I don't understand why people are so upset. But anyway, when you said Steve Gerber, I was like, let's do this, because I had not read anything that was Howard the Duck Steve Gerber related that I could recall.
He had a brief appearance in Civil War where he went to register as a superhuman and was told that the federal government found his existence too perplexing, so their official stance was that he didn't exist.
That's perfect. As far as Howard in the comics, I mean, like I said, I watched the movie. I know the movie. I remember watching that over and over. I had a babysitter and they had HBO. And they had HBO. I'd go over there and it was playing like every day during the summer. And I was like, oh man, let's see what's happening on where we're at now. I don't remember reading anything in the comics about him. Like I said, maybe there was part of the Marvel Zombies run, one of those sequels or whatever that I can remember him showing up in. I do, however, have the first issue of the 1979 magazine Howard the Duck. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
Oh no, I don't think I have.
And this is another auction story. I think I ended up with it accidentally through an auction. It wasn't anything I was shooting for, but next thing I know, I'm looking at it and it's the number one issue of the magazine. I was just looking over the creative team on it. It looks like it's a lot of Bill Mantlo.
Yeah, he's the guy that picked it up. If I recall, after Gerber, he kind of finished out the existing storyline. And then, I think I do remember reading about they kind of transitioned it to a magazine. So
to kind of give you a idea of the humor that has always been kind of associated with Howard the Duck, the cover of the magazine, Howard boldly waddles up to his weirdest foes, the macabre Mr. Chicken, Jackpot, the one-armed bandit, the charismatic chair thing, and I'm going to pronounce this pro rata cosmic accountant.
Pro rata, the financial wizard.
Oh, that's funny stuff. 64 pages of gleaming, glorious black and white. But there you go. That is the cover of Howard the Duck #1, the magazine from '79. But yeah, there's my kind of history with both characters. Both characters I knew about, both characters I don't have a whole lot of history with. When we had the chance to talk about both of these, plus get the opportunity to read about Steve Gerber, I was all for it. You knew wacky stuff was going to be happening in the She-Hulk pages, especially if Steve Gerber is going to be getting a hold of things. So we know he can write seriously, but when you look at the cover of the first issue, guess what? No, that is not happening. Issue 14, that is not happening. We have
trapped in the baloneyverse.
Here's She-Hulk and Howard the Duck sitting on top of half of some spicy bologna, it looks like. Some strange stuff is afoot. So I want to step back here, Evan.
Talk a little bit about my history with Howard, because even though, I'm now like, hey, if you only know the movie, you don't know Howard. The first place I actually encountered Howard was even after this issue came out, but in the pages of Generation X, when he picked up a hitchhiking chamber and skin and gave them a ride back to the Massachusetts Academy.
Jesus Christ.
And then
that was an interesting interaction.
Yeah, and then they did a spinoff, and I can't believe I never bought this at some point. I swear I've seen it in some dollar bins, so I'm going to go back and find it, but called Daydreamers, where it was like Howard, Franklin Richards, Artie, Leach, and Man-Thing. Howard has long been associated with Man-Thing. I believe that's when he first popped up, was at the nexus of all reality in a Man-Thing story. So that came out in the 90s. It wasn't until I got the essential Howard the Duck, those Marvel phone book size black and white reprints that had Gerber's entire run. And I mean, it is just, there's stuff in there that's even more absurd than the Baloney verse, and Gerber references a lot of that, but there's also real emotion and character stuff going on.
Yeah, that takes talent to write something that humorous, but actually keep that level on both ends without tipping it one way and becoming a joke, or tipping it the other and not being as funny. But
yeah, he's I mention all the time, I think I've already mentioned Peter David is probably my favorite writer, but I mean Steve Gerber is right there in that he can be as crazy and off the wall as you can tolerate, and yet deliver the goods, classic superhero, genuine emotion, all that stuff. So like I said, I'm not sure I read much, if any, Steve Gerber before he passed away. And now, if I find something that Steve Gerber wrote, I'm liable to snatch it up. I mean, he's written, classic Daredevil stuff, Marvel 2-in-1, like I mentioned, that great Christmas issue I'm always talking about, where the Thing and Ghost Rider save Christmas.
Right.
I mean, he even did a one-shot for DC in a Dr. Fate crossover they were doing with Zariel, the angel that joined the Justice League. And I don't even remember the action part of it, but this book opens with Zariel visiting a Catholic school class, and the kids start asking him all these questions like, do pets go to heaven, and all this stuff that and he's just utterly bewildered. All the stuff you'd want to ask a representative of the Almighty, and all the hard questions. And Zariel's just like, well, fantastic. She-Hulk. Good. I remember getting an issue of the original She-Hulk series at this flea market where I got a lot of my comics, and I knew she was the one who replaced the Thing in the Fantastic Four. She was an Avenger, but I just got some of the comedic She-Hulk issues here and there. Funny thing is, as much as I appreciated the comedy, I know some people don't like the fourth wall breaking. I like it. I just don't want it to be overdone. But I remember there was a Heroes for Hire series when I was in college that I bought a few issues of, and I was trying to decide what I could still afford to keep collecting, what I'd have to let go. And She-Hulk was their lawyer and guest starred and broke the fourth wall. And I'm like, nah, that's annoying. I'm done.
Oh.
But because it was outside of her comic, I'm like, that's cool in her comic, but let's not overdo it, people.
Let's not do this over here. No.
So I don't know. Clearly, I wasn't too attached to that series anyway. But that's one thing I remember. I was like, well, that's fine in the pages of She-Hulk, but let's not go overboard. But yeah, that's so yeah. She-Hulk, somebody I've always known, never really was a. Well, no, I take that. I did read She-Hulk when again I keep going back to the same themes, and this time it's not Squirrel Girl, but Peter David took over her regular series after Dan Slott had been writing it for a while. So put Peter David's name in the credits, and I bought that as long as he kept going with it.
Do me a quick favor, and just for our listeners, I know about these characters. Maybe there's something that I do not know. Can you kind of give us like an origin of Howard the Duck and She-Hulk here, and that way we kind of know who we're getting?
Yeah, well, She-Hulk is Bruce Banner's cousin, Jennifer Walters. In the comics, I believe she was a district attorney or an assistant district attorney, and was shot in an attempted mob hit. And she was dying, and she needed a blood transfusion, and Bruce Banner had the matching type along with the bonus of horrific levels of gamma radiation.
Mm-hmm.
So for a while, she was, her original series was called The Savage She-Hulk. And she, when she got angry, she got big and green. And eventually she gained more control over her abilities, and was pretty much, she was Jennifer all the time, just sometimes she was almost 7 feet tall and green. And then she became an Avenger. The Hulk was an Avenger first, but She-Hulk was an Avenger much longer. And then after Secret Wars, she took the Thing's place on the Fantastic Four for a while. Howard the Duck, like I said, the Man-Thing, aside from being a big blob of walking swamp muck that sets people on fire when he touches them, but only if they're afraid.
That's right.
He also was the guardian of the nexus of all realities, and with some kind of interdimensional stuff going on, Howard ended up popping through to our reality, and eventually he met a young lady named Beverly Switzler, who became his friend, possibly love interest. I always thought they were friends, but the more I've been reading, they have a deep connection.
Elements of a romance.
We do get a cameo by Bev in this, which I really appreciated. But, Howard, the slogan was always, Howard is trapped in a world he never made. Even though he's a duck from another universe, he is sort of the everyman. Is sometimes the only one with any common sense and just trying to hang on to a little bit of sanity in a crazy world. Surrounded by the likes of Dr. Bong, the Space Turnip, Dr. Angst and his band of the bland, all sorts of things like that. Occasionally, when the story calls for it, he does know a little bit of martial arts. He is a master of quack fu.
Oh my gosh.
The more recent stories, he's gotten a job as a private investigator. So he actually has, in more recent years, crossed paths with She-Hulk for work-related purposes. But this was the first time they met, in continuity.
Gotcha. All right, man. Well, if you're ready, I'm ready. We'll jump into these first two issues, and let's hear what happens in issues 14 and 15 of the Sensational She-Hulk.
Okay, well, issues 14 and 15, they were released, according to Mike's Amazing World of Comics, on February 6th and March 6th, 1990, for the creative team. And this does stay the same all through, although the covers change a little bit. But as we've discussed, written by Steve Gerber, penciled by a young Brian Hitch, who helped bring the Ultimates to fruition, and has done a lot of stuff. And now, usually, whenever he does a book, it's an event. Looks like here he was just kind of cutting his teeth. Marvel. An inker that I believe you're familiar with, Jim Sanders III. Letterer is Jim Novak. Colorist Glynis Oliver. The editor is Bobby Chase, who I always remember because she actually popped up with a word balloon in Sensational She-Hulk #3, which was the first issue I read. And I think she edited the Hulk around this time too, so I recognize her name. Editor-in-chief was Tom DeFalco. The cover for issue 14, I believe we determined just before we started recording, was by another favorite artist of mine, Mark Teixeira, right, and inked by Harry Candelario. That's what I'm calling it. That's how I'm pronouncing his name.
I like it.
So issue 14, there's a lot of great titles in these, but I don't think they ever topped the first one, A Baloney Place of Dying.
That's right. This is part 1 of the Cosmic Squish Principle.
Yeah, it's so small on the cover, I almost didn't notice it.
Right.
So, and clearly I didn't put it in the notes here. Rookie synopsisizer here. All right, so the story opens with a bald observer in space waxing on about how his race took a vow to observe but never interfere after a disastrous interaction with a less advanced society. They, of course, became the Watchers, but our narrator joined a splinter sect that offers commentary on what they observe, the Critics. This particular critic was watching matter being pulled into a black hole about 10 years before the start of the story, when a giant plunger struck the event horizon, reversing its flow to create a transdimensional blowhole. That's a technical term. I made sure that I was saying it correctly. From there, we segue into She-Hulk and her assistant, Wheezy, who was actually a Golden Age heroine known as the Blonde Phantom, as they investigate a mysterious phenomenon in Mount Pressure, Vermont. She-Hulk has dug up what appears to be a pitch-black cowbell, but is actually some sort of high-gravity container for something, which promptly escapes as a coil of energy and dumps She-Hulk in a nearby frozen pond. Noticing the container is now white, she reaches in and her hand emerges in Cleveland, specifically the refrigerator of one Howard the Duck. The scene shifts to a prison in New York where a convict named Floyd Mangles has forgotten to hide his box of mundane items, including a plunger, beneath his drop cloth of invisibility. After assuring the warden and guard the objects pose no threat, Floyd mentally gloats that the big squish is coming, and it can't be stopped.
The big squish.
Back in New York, She-Hulk is weakened and ill, feeling much like she did when her cousin Bruce gave her that life-saving transfusion of his gamma-irradiated blood many years ago. With Reed Richards unavailable, She-Hulk contacts the only theoretical physicist she knows, an old college boyfriend named Brent Wilcox. Wilcox theorizes the container holds an entire universe inside it, and further investigation shows its building blocks are made of cold cuts and various sandwich ingredients. As he and She-Hulk ponder this mystery, Howard is delivered to the office by the critic. He plucked the duck out of Cleveland, deciding his non-Terran instincts were needed to avert a crisis linked to the mysterious container and the reversed black hole. Wilcox gets knocked into the container, and She-Hulk follows, dragging Howard along until she can figure out how he's connected to all this strangeness. They land in the Baloneyverse, but before they can start searching for Wilcox, they have to contend with the fact that She-Hulk has reverted back to her human form, which apparently was not a thing she did at that point.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
it must have been a big deal.
In subsequent issues, they make reference to that. I guess she hadn't been just Jennifer for a while. And now we go to what may have been your favorite title, issue 15, with a cover by Dale Keown and inked by Joseph Rubinstein. A story entitled Secret Warts.
Oh my gosh, this is great. This is so good.
A horde of demonic critters descend upon Jen and Howard, at first more interested in devouring the cold-cut landscape than the new arrivals. When their attention shifts, Jen and Howard hop onto another meat platform careening through the void and land on a nearby meatball, as you do. More creatures erupt from the surface and attack Jen, who suddenly transforms into a larger, angrier, very gray She-Hulk. And keep in mind, this was around the time that the original Hulk was gray as well. So she starts channeling angry Bruce Banner Hulk, referring to herself in the third person, saying how she hates puny Jennifer, etc. Just as she's lashing out at Wilcox for something he did to Jen in college, the critic intervenes to return them to Wilcox's office and get them back on track toward saving the universe, a mission of which Howard, Jen, and Wilcox remain unaware. In an interlude, we meet a rest home resident who undergoes a savage transformation into the Golden Age hero known as the Terror. He brutally dispatches the manager of the facility, who mismanaged its funds, and the investor who took advantage.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, the leadership of the prison discover Floyd Mangles was a bona fide supervillain named Dr. Angst. The building begins to shake as a 6-story power drill affects Mangles' escape. Once outside, he uses a series of mundane magical artifacts, his specialty, to locate his associates in the Band of the Bland. Tilly the Hun, the Black Hole, Sitting Bullseye, and the Spanker. This is not their first appearance, as they attempted to assassinate Howard when he was the presidential nominee of the All Night Party back in Marvel Treasury Edition number 12 in 1976. Back at her New York offices, Jen and company are trying to figure out what exactly happened. At some point, Wilcox has theorized that the Baloneyverse was a failed universe that has been stored in one of these cowbell-shaped containers. Didn't work out because it was a universe based on sandwich ingredients. Was somehow tucked away there for safekeeping.
What were they calling it here? It was a encroachiverse.
Yes.
Right? Is that what it was? Okay.
Which, until somebody proves me wrong, I'm going to say was the basis for the whole Jonathan Hickman Secret Wars and the incursions and things like that.
They were going to call them encroachments, but they decided to call them incursions. Okay,
I like to think Jonathan Hickman read this and thought, why only 4 issues, Marvel?
Yeah.
It's the boat.
You guys missed the boat. My turn now.
So, initially, Jen seems to think that she's actually been cured, but comes to realize that she's more likely following the pattern Bruce did when he was initially the Gray Hulk and changing at sundown. So she, Wilcox, Howard, and Louise hop into her flying Dodge, which I thought was a Shield flying car, but I think it has another origin.
Interesting.
Into that another time. They are racing the sunset, trying to get to the underground bunker in New Mexico where Bruce rode out his early transformations. Once inside, Jen finds she's not alone, as there are a pair of frightened teenagers who took shelter there because of their warts, which are secret.
Yes, they are.
None of this is working out the way the critic hoped, leaving him to watch as a mass of debris and condensed failed universes hurtle toward the Earth.
Oh.
That is the end of Sensational She-Hulk number 15.
Wow. There are so many times I've read a comic that's tried to be funny. The goal was to try and make the reader laugh. And of course, as you grow older, it's kind of tough to read something, at least for me. I don't know if you become too cynical or what, but this hit all the all the silly spots for me. It's so silly that it was funny. And it's tough for that to be hit. And that was on the mark for me in these 2 issues. Now, let's start with the titles. The titles are like warped versions of comic book titles, which is great. A Baloney Place of Dying, which was, the lonely place of dying that was happening over in DC at the time, which was a Batman storyline. Secret Wars and Secret Warts, obviously. And then we're going to have a couple others that pop up here in the next 2. So that's neat. I love that. I love that little touch. When you start off with a cosmic plunger reversing the pull of a black hole, you're good to go in my book. You see this huge plunger come up and hit this black hole and it reverses it. I was like, this story is how off the rails is this story going to get? The 6-story tall drill. Funny. Shulky's arm coming through, she sticks it through. It's just so random. I think that's what gets me. It's random. It feels so random. Like she sticks her arm through this thing and it comes through the back of Howard's fridge, of all places. His fridge. The baloney verse, for crying out loud. That is absolutely silly.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just going to say, it's not so random. Sometimes I think when people are trying to be funny, they're just like, let's just say the most crazy, off-the-wall, random stuff. And some of this is, but some of it comes together more than you might expect, or you get the feeling there's more thought put into it than just, well, where's her hand go? I know, Howard's refrigerator.
Right.
I mean... Just, you almost wonder which came first, a baloney place of dying, or how about a universe whose basic form of matter is baloney? Oh, wait, I can make a funny title out of this.
Right. And
but it works. I mean, especially those first 2 titles, those are not random joke titles, or at least they weren't only random joke titles because they tie directly into the story.
They do. That's exactly right. I could tell you that I think Secret Warts, the title, was derived first. Because there's no way that they decided to end the 2nd issue with these 2 kids that have warts that are hiding in a bunker. Like, they set you up at the beginning to think, oh, well, clearly it's a baloney verse. And you see Secret Warts and you're like, how are they going to work this in? Story continues to go on. You're like, there's nothing to do with Secret Warts here. What's going on? And like 3 panels from the end, the kids show up and they're like, what are you doing in here? We got warts and they're secret. And I laughed. I legitimately, and I don't know what it takes to make somebody laugh out loud, but it worked for me. And I laughed out loud legitimately when I read that, because it was like, That's how they did it. And it was so funny. Like, these kids are hiding in this vault because they're so ashamed. That's the way I took it initially. They're so ashamed of these warts that they don't want anybody to know. And oh my goodness, here comes some lady. Wow, they're secret warts. Oh, I was so tickled and had a fun time with these first 2 issues. Now, I haven't even talked about like Mangle's team, which you said had been around for a little while.
The Band of the Bland. This is their second and for most of them final appearance in this storyline. There was a storyline in 1976 where Howard was nominated for president by the All Night Party, and these
All Night Party.
And these folks were hired to assassinate him. And it's been a while since I read it, but I believe he teamed up with the Defenders to repel the attack.
Oh my gosh. So, of course, there are these 3, or I should say these 4 members of this team, which you didn't get into because I know you're doing a synopsis. You're not getting into the details, but the details on how Dr. Angst becomes the Doctor, number 1, by eating an old, like, moldy cracker that has a fly on it or something.
The Eucalyptus.
I mean, come on. And people don't know, because you went through the list of who these people are that are on his team. But folks, the Spanker, if you would have just took the text box off of there and just had a picture of this guy, you would have thought it was Frank Castle, the Punisher. But no, that's the joke. He's the Spanker. And he has a paddle van, by the way, folks. We find out later, a paddle, that's Paddle, not battle van, paddle van.
As long as we're talking about the Spanker, my favorite thing about him, even more than the smiley face that he has instead of a skull, is his real name. Did you catch his real name, Jesse?
Oh, yes. You actually pointed it out. I looked it over, and but please tell the listeners.
Okay, well, the Punisher's real name is
Frank Castle.
This gentleman's name is Fred Hovel.
That is great.
We have Marvel canon, folks.
It's beautiful. It really is. The only other note I had here was the Terror, and I'm just going to save that. Just be aware, folks. I didn't know what in the world was going on with this guy. I have no idea why he's getting involved in this story. What does he do? He brings some justice. He's an older guy, and all of a sudden he turns into this he almost looks kind of like a Dracula kind of guy.
Yeah, he transforms in the presence of evil.
Yes, he does. And he did. And he wreaks some havoc. Now, how does he figure into this? Well, we're going to find out here later, because some of the best moments of this comic and the Terror are to come in the next 2 issues. But all right, I'm pulling back here, Evan Bevins. What are your notes, man?
Okay, so right away, we're introduced to the Critic, and this just feels like Steve Gerber. I mean, this is, very not so subtle parody, but still, clever, funny right from the start. The guy's dialogue, repugnant though it may be, I must make a decision. Instead of just sitting back and saying what everybody else does wrong, he's got to take action. I liked that we got to see Beverly, and we didn't get any Knot or Sykes for you, but as far as 90s conventions goes, she's working as a ninja.
Yes, indeed. And I remember her talking about, or maybe it was Howard. No, it was her. She said she may have missed the train on the ninja thing, because this is 1990. I'm like, man, the Turtles are still going strong here. I mean, I don't think you've missed that boat.
But and Howard says, look, I tried to tell you, when that many ninjas are out of work, it means there's not a demand. That's why they're teaching. Howard's always the sensible one. A lot of this, aside from the comedy, especially in issue 15, it really the way Gerber writes Howard as a character really stands out. I mean, She-Hulk's mad at him. She dragged him into this baloney verse because she didn't know what was going on. But once they're in danger, Howard's putting all that aside. He's still sardonic and sarcastic because that's who he is. But he doesn't let his frustration with She-Hulk put them in more danger. He's working with Jen, and and she even apologizes for dragging him along. And then she hulks out and turns on him, and Howard's like, okay, I gotta talk this lady down. And she says, is Duck She-Hulk's friend? And Howard goes, well, to be honest, I hadn't given the relationship much thought. Once they get back and Jen's thinking, oh, I'm cured, Howard's the one that figures out, oh, she didn't realize what she turned into, so he's telling Wilcox, hey, you got to let her down easy. You got to tell her that she's got a problem. And Howard doesn't do it himself. He's snarky, he's easily angered, but he recognizes, that this is a person who's hurting and in trouble. And so I just like the way that he's not just a one-dimensional grumpy old man.
I'm calling Gray She-Hulk, by the way, is now the sensational. Well, actually, they crossed that out, but I'm going to call her the She-Bulk. When she turns gray, folks, she just doesn't turn, at this point, she doesn't just turn Jennifer Walters She-Hulk gray. She is a massive Hulk-like lady with bulging muscles everywhere. So it's a definite change from what you're used to if you're reading She-Hulk. And you talked about how this was going on in The Incredible Hulk title as well. That happened. She turns into the more savage mindset. She's more simple-minded. She's lost her intellect.
This was something that they actually did 25 or so years later, where She-Hulk almost died in Civil War II. Thanos almost killed her, and War Machine died in that attack when She-Hulk almost died. And when she came back from it, she was traumatized, and she was a bigger, savage, gray She-Hulk.
Oh, okay.
I don't know that they actually, were specifically referencing this story, but that is, so because, Hulk's transformations are tied to their emotional state. So
right.
This is something that was revisited. Let's see. Then like I said, we get to see Dr. Angst in action. One thing, I'm not the biggest Doctor Strange fan, but I like his flair for dramatically naming objects and stuff. He's got a lot of alliteration. By the hoary hosts of Hagath.
Right.
The Book of the Vishanti, stuff like that. And Dr. Angst has his own things such as the drop cloth of invisibility, which predates Harry Potter's cloak of invisibility. The Eucharitz cracker. The object he reversed the black hole's polarity with was the plunger of the patootie.
Oh, wow. So
he escapes in some balloons that he refers to as the inflatable orbs of egg.
The shoe. You got to talk about the shoe. And now, as I gaze into my pedestrian prognosticator, the penultimate phase begins. He's looking into a shoe to see, like, in the fetid folds of its insole, I shall locate my former associates.
Of its insole.
Oh, yeah, S-O-U-L. Right.
And again, as we'll see in the subsequent issues, it's not just the puns. Like, there is a reason that he draws power from these dull, mundane objects. It's not just a gag, which is pretty darn funny, but it even factors into the story as well.
It's not like the art is something to miss out on either. There may be some gags and some panels too that you may be missing.
It's not as stylized as what you think of with Hitch's pencils now. It's more almost like a house style, but I mean it's very clear and effective as comic art, and yet it does lend itself into the comedy without being real exaggerated or absurd.
Look at the costume of Dr. Angst.
Yes.
All right. So
they were thinking about the cosplayers before cosplaying was really big. I mean, you could make a better costume than this at home.
You want to see somebody at a con with this on, because it looks like that looks like a headlight off of a car to attach his cape, which is purple and orange with a green, I guess, costume underneath, some green gloves. And I'm going to just say it's a piece of tape or something across the chest that says sorcerer and an arrow pointing to the word sorcerer, just in case you didn't get it. And his belt, folks, to hold everything together, to complete this ensemble, looks like an extension cord, because there's definitely a plug hanging off the side of that. So it's just, I mean, I can't. It's good stuff. It's great stuff. Well, let's go ahead. We'll get into the next two, man. I'm having a good time. Let's see what's happening.
All right. We keep the same creative team. The cover on issue 16 is Dale Keown, this time inked by Ernie Colon. I'll just pronounce it every possible way.
I think
this issue came out on April 3rd, 1990. And then issue 17 was Keown, inked by Joseph Rubinstein, and it came out on May 1st, 1990. Issue 16, borrowing again from a classic DC story, is entitled The Lowbrow Hunters. While trying to escape Bruce Banner's old bunker, She-Hulk threatens to smash and crush the puny humans for putting her in there, not to mention sue them for wrongful imprisonment. Just a quick reminder that Steve Gerber is writing this. And that She-Hulk was a lawyer. The teens hiding out there because of their gamma-induced secret warts are impressed and help her escape with the powers their blemishes bestow. She-Hulk, for some reason, wants to smash Wilcox and Louise. Howard seems to have gotten a pass. And the kids suggest they might be at the nearby Gamma Ray Dude Ranch and Spa. This is in the Hulk's old stomping grounds, after all.
Right.
She-Hulk rampages through the tourist trap, only to be overcome by the steam from the natural hot spring baths, which include some residual gamma radiation. She falls into one and comes out looking and sounding more like her old self, but still gray. And Wilcox theorizes that residual gamma radiation triggered the new mutation. Then we get a montage of Dr. Angst reuniting his band of the Bland and giving us an update on the status circa 1990 of Tilly the Hun, the Spanker, the Black Hole, and Sitting Bullseye. She-Hulk and company start to realize that they really have no idea what's going on. Howard describes the critic in his oath of non-interference, which gets Jen thinking correctly about Watchers. While her traveling companions bicker, Jen turns on the radio and a convenient news broadcast informs them that more compacted universes are falling to Earth and tells them about a sighting of the critic. The critic leapt from a 747 in frustration that his plan to save the universe wasn't panning out and lands next to a rest home where the Terror lives. Sensing his presence, the critic uses his power to determine the Terror's origin. All right, sit back, folks. You're about to hear a classic comic book origin.
This is fantastic. I love this.
The Terror, a.k.a. Laszlo Pevley, was rescued from a near-fatal car accident by a scientist whose dog had just died while defending him from a runaway gorilla. To save Laszlo's life, the scientist injected him with a serum derived from the dog's brain, just as two gangsters burst in. The presence of evil triggers Laszlo's transformation into the Terror, complete with a vampire cape that disappears after he slaughters the criminals just in time for the professor to die of a heart attack. Before we can figure out where the Terror fits into all this, She-Hulk's flying car plows right into one of the failed universes where an array of bizarre creatures are hurtling through the air to their self-inflicted doom. As the Baloneyverse was built on lunch meat, this reality appears to revolve around suicide.
Oh, wow.
And on that cheery note, we segue to issue 17, which references one of my all-time favorite crossovers that I still need to do an epic blog or possible podcast series on, Acts of Vengeance with Acts of Peevishness. She-Hulk's flying dodge hurtles through the suicide verse, prompting her to clear the falling masses with little moral debate. Wilcox deduces they flew into another failed universe like the Cold Cuts cosmos, but Howard breaks into his theorizing to ask how multiple universes can exist in the same place at the same time. Wilcox's answer? They can't. They would squish each other, compacting like the ones that have been trapped in the strange containers. His point is proven when they emerge in St. Louis, despite having not traveled long or far enough to reach it. They hurtle through several other verses, each giving Gerber a chance for some commentary brought to life by Hitch's pencils. Finally, they reach London, which has been squished right up against New York. The critic arrives, having fully given up on his Watcher-critic's creed after failing to reveal the nature of the threat to the Terror in a game of 20 questions. Never saw you all two try that one. The scene shifts to an area of Manhattan that is exempt from the squishing of the universe, along with 4 other locations: Henderson, Nevada, El Segundo, California, most of New Jersey, and the planet Squazzle, known for manufacturing doorstops. These places will form the building blocks of Dr. Angst's new Incipiverse, a mundane realm that he will rule and no higher powers will want to interfere with because it's so dull. Howard realizes his old foe is behind the plot once the critic rattles off these locales and their unremarkable characteristics. Before they can take action, though, the band of the Bland arrives. Tilly the Hun challenges She-Hulk. Sitting Bullseye shows his bravado by targeting the elderly, untransformed Terror. The spanker decides to discipline Louise, and the black hole sucks the critic into his singularity. But Jesse, they forgot about Howard.
Oh, boy.
The duck turns the tide by shoving his cigar into the spanker's mouth, allowing Louise to dish out a little punishment of her own. Sitting Bullseye finds himself outmatched when the Terror transforms, and She-Hulk wrests Tilly's mace from her and literally knocks her out of the park. Wilcox contributes by figuring out that the black hole could absorb and condense all the universes, just like the containers, and the gang force his singularity open wide enough for the critic to escape. With the critic's powers directing the vacuum, the day is saved. The critic makes everybody forget he was there. She-Hulk goes green again, and we finish with the critic sitting atop the bloated black hole, reading a book entitled Crisis Management on Infinite Earths.
I don't know if you have this in your notes for the very end, but I want to say how much joy it brings me to watch the critic have to be like would you call him the Deus Ex Machina of what has to happen here? The guy, because he's the critic, but he has to be the very thing that he hates in order to resolve this conflict.
I mean, in my notes, I wrote, that this was kind of meandering for 3 issues. They had no idea what they were supposed to be doing. And then everything gets crammed into the end. If you even start to criticize that, you realize there's literally a character in the story pointing out the problem. It's like, you guys don't know what you're doing. That you're wandering out. You're missing the point. You're wandering away from the plot. What is going on here? Now I have to save everything and rush this all to completion. And I mean, I don't think that Gerber accidentally made the story meander and then rushed to its conclusion. He was doing that on purpose. But if he dropped the ball anywhere or made a mistake, who's gonna criticize him? He's already written a character in there pointing out all the flaws in the story.
Dude, that's genius. I will tell you that there were points in the story where I was trying to understand the logistics of the black hole and the alternate universe and their plan to try and fix things, and because it's not like it was just left off the table. No, you've got Professor Wilcox explaining everything and how they're going to try and fix this. But none of it made sense to me whatsoever. I'm sitting there, I'm like, okay, these things are encroaching on each other, and he's going to do this to undo it. And it all came down to them using the black hole to suck all this stuff in. And then finally I got to a point where it's like, I don't care. I really don't. I think what I needed to do was just realize I wanted to be, or I should be on the ride, not trying to figure out what the ride is doing. That takes the enjoyment away. Took me a few times to realize, oh, just go with it, man. None of it's supposed to. You're trying to make sense of a story that started, or I should say the beginning of this story ended in a baloney verse. What are you doing? Stop what you're doing right now. Stop trying to make sense of this and just enjoy the tale. Of course, it's all neatly wrapped up in a bow. Boom, we hit them with the memory loss, the amnesia of everything. Nobody remembers anything. Boy, would somebody tear that apart. But guess what? The critic's already done that.
Yeah.
The critic has already done that. Genius bit of writing, in my opinion. Okay, you told the origin of the Terror, and I wrote it in all caps. The Terror telling his origin to the critic is probably one of my, it's up there as far as one of my favorite parts of this book, because it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. This gorilla breaks in, and the dog is what had me. Like, the dog's face started glowing, and you're like, what is going on? An escaped gorilla came in and out of the rain to interrupt the secret scientific research of one of Professor Storm. The ape attacked, but Storm's faithful dog, Rex, leaped to his rescue. Something in the little mutt caught fire. As he went after the ape, his skull began to glow, and with a ferocity you don't generally see in a beagle mix, He tore out the ape's throats. Rex had saved his master, but at the cost of his own life. Storm was aghast, of course, but he didn't have much time to ruminate. Just then, a car was struck by lightning. And rammed into a tree. The driver, yours truly. See, I was trying to figure, it's like, this is the professor. No, wait a second. It's not. It's the guy that hits the tree. So anyway, yours truly lay in a puddle of blood and mud. I would have died that night if not for the daring and slightly demented idea that occurred of Storm. He strapped me into a gizmo. See, you're like, okay, so this guy runs out, finds this dude who's about nearly dead, and he's like, oh, you know what I need to do? He strapped me into a gizmo that bombarded my nervous system with high-frequency radio waves. He shot me up with a serum distilled from Rex's brain. This is how he decided to save him. The gangsters break in. What happened next was astounding. He turns into the Terror, rips evil to shreds, as he says. That accomplished, I reverted to my normal self, and the professor had died of a heart attack. Well, not quite. He lived long enough to tell me about the gorilla and the dog. Oh, all right. It's like they know everything is just unbelievable. But here it is, folks. This is what happened. And even I can't believe it. But anyway, I loved him telling this origin and how just insane it was, and the fact that they acknowledge how insane it was. Great stuff.
Oh yeah, and there's so many pieces of so many superhero origins in that story. I mean, there's a little bit of Swamp Thing in there. You know, how many people have had their lives saved by a unorthodox experiment.
And so, when he changes into the Terror, so does his clothes.
Yes. but here's the thing: the Terror is a real character from like 1940.
Right. So I'm going through my stuff, and I sent you the message because I was just on a lark. I was like, has this guy been around for a while? And I sure enough looked him up on I think it was MarvelFandom.com, and there was the bio, and I looked at the date that he was created, and I was like, this guy's been around for that long, and I have a feeling, number one, they probably did their research looking for one of the craziest origins out there for a Marvel hero, and somebody who hasn't been used for a while. Probably not hard to find.
I'm trying to look it up now. Sadly, there's only one issue of Mystic Comics on Marvel Unlimited, and it's not that one.
Oh, bummer. Oh, yeah, by the way, my other note here about the Terror telling his origin to the Critic is, I said also the Critic would be the last person you'd want to tell that origin to. You do not want to tell that guy that. There's a lot of commentary, and we're going to get into this here probably because I'm still on issue 16, but there's a lot of commentary that Gerber has about the human, humanity and the human race and their nature, I guess, human nature. Specifically, the fact that people are going to become curious about these anomalies that have been sitting there, and he's waiting for them to start poking these anomalies, and it's going to cause problems. And then everybody starts poking these things. One guy in France is taking a baguette or a long piece of bread and poking it into the anomaly. Oh, it's hilarious just to see it drawn on the page is funny.
Oh yeah.
It's great. But that was issue 16. I'm gonna stop. I've been talking for a while because we need to talk about the universes. But if you have any other notes other than those, go ahead.
Yeah, the origin really stands out. The origin of the Terror. I'd love to read the original story and see where it came from. I like getting to see more of the band of the Bland. A lot of them are fairly straightforward, but the one that I did a little bit more research on, because he was one I thought you wouldn't see this guy in a comic today, was Sitting Bullseye. And I found out he is not Native American.
He definitely looks it, or at least he's trying to look it anyway.
He was a CIA agent who went undercover with a native tribe. I think it was to frame them for either counterfeiting or smuggling drugs, something like that. Sorry, I don't have it pulled up right in front of me, but he went undercover, but he was trying to frame them. In response, they tattooed a bullseye on him. Oh yes, his real name is Oliver Bedwette. Or Bedwette. Bedwette.
Of course.
So yes, he's got a bullseye tattooed on his chest to make his undercover activities more difficult.
Wow.
A CIA operative who was sent to infiltrate the American Indian movement to look for proof that they were producing illegal alcohol. The natives eventually discovered his true identity and tattooed a large target on his chest before running him off their reservation. So, yeah, I mean, the spanker is pretty straightforward. The black hole was a carnival sideshow attraction, and Tilly the Hun was at a gym for plus-size women. So,
jeez, criminy.
Just Gerber reaching back, bringing these characters back. Just fantastic to to see that. Now, the only one that ever appeared anywhere after this, I don't remember the name of the series, but the Black Hole, I think, showed up in Ravencroft Asylum in some event involving Carnage. He was just shown off in a cell, I think. But I think he's the only one that ever appeared after this, at least according to the Marvel fandom. So that's about all I had on issue 16. If you want to segue into 17, where there's a whole lot squished in there.
The only thing I'll kind of open it with is, boy, do we have some 90s references here. Right here on this first page, where everybody is apparently trying to kill themselves in the suicide-averse. As everybody is dying, or I should say, trying to commit suicide, they're uttering things like cry, die, slide. They're trying to rhyme, apparently. Yeah. I mean, I guess you're going to rhyme die with die. It's always going to rhyme. Yeah. But cry, die, slide die, square root of pi die, slow die, Bo doesn't know die. Now that is a 90s reference, folks. That's beautiful. But I'll let you go first on the notes here, man, because you're probably going to hit most of the stuff I have anyway. So please go ahead.
I mean, just the opening with, She-Hulk trying to clear all the hurtling critters off. And she says, what'll it be, fellas, up or down? And they say, yeah, no, we want to die. And she goes, well, it's your universe, your choice. Far be it from me to violate the Prime Directive.
Perfect Star Trek reference.
Yeah, I mean, there's less than a page. She resolves the debate over whether she should try to stop these creatures from doing what their universal imperative is to do.
Is to do, right? Yeah.
But I mean, then we're just getting started on the Gerber commentary. Let's see. We have the "Don't worry, be happy" verse.
Yes, and folks, don't worry, be happy. Just to kind of put this out here, I grabbed from the wiki because, my goodness, I remember this song. I'm sure Evan Bevins remembers this song. 1988, Bobby McFerrin comes out with "Don't Worry, Be Happy," which I think was off of his fourth album. He'd been around for a while. We never even heard of this guy. But his fourth album, Simple Pleasures, in 1988. My son, my youngest, yesterday was singing "Don't Worry, Be Happy," and I'm like, did you know that that's where you got that from? And I'm sure it was YouTube, but anyway, to hear him singing, I was like, that's Bobby McFerrin, right? And he has no idea what I'm talking about.
And it seems like maybe Steve Gerber didn't think that was the best philosophy. It's not just a joke like, hey, here's a whole universe based on the song "Don't Worry, Be Happy." There's commentary right there, which is weird because I would have been led to believe that politics and comics was only a recent phenomenon.
Yeah, you've been hornswoggled, sir.
Yeah, I mean, you've got this absolutely goofy joke and Steve Gerber saying, look at what's wrong with the world, and people are going around singing "Don't worry, be happy."
Right. All water filthy, be happy. It's like, oh man, it's sad, really. Rain acid, be happy. It's like, geez Louise.
And then we go into the Trashiverse made of garbage and supermarket tabloids, with apparently a whole problem with people being born with two heads.
Right. It is all over. Yeah, this is basically the landscape. It's so interesting because I love this kind of I don't know if trope's the right word, where you're going through alternate realities and seeing what's out there. And yes, we're hitting this earth where there is nothing but like just piles upon trash, but trash goes both ways here. We got trash in the media, with the print media here in these tabloids, and of course trash all over the ground, and people just waiting to get that next issue so they can read about apparently some Donald Trump. They were so engrossed with the Trumps right now.
Yes. So then we go into one that's extremely dated and not at all relevant today, the Mediaverse.
Right.
Where everyone is a cosmos of cyclopeans with camcorders for brains, where life is spent in an endless loop of interviews and every being is his own talk show.
Let me tell you, there is some deep thought going into what is going on. And as silly as this is, because it's like somebody with a camcorder on the top of their head, one big eye in the middle, and microphones for hands. It really is. If you pick that apart, you're going to start seeing a lot of things that are being talked about.
Oh, yeah.
The first thing I thought about was like podcasts. You and I, we've known each other for a little while now. Podcasts have been a thing since 2005. But at some point, we made a decision like, man, when we talk, we need this recorded. we need other people to enjoy this. At least in some way you could draw a line from the Mediaverse to what I do, what you and I do, sit here and talking about comics and recording each other and interviewing asking each other questions and putting it on display too. That's the other thing, putting it out there. Of all the universes that we are going to travel through here, the Mediaverse is the one that made me go, oh, okay, man, you are talking about something here. It really took me. And of course, I'm sure a lot of it's probably informed back then of the big boom of talk shows.
Sure, but
we're just getting ready to get into Oprah Winfrey's probably getting huge at about this point in 1990. Sally Jesse Raphael had been around. Donahue had been around for a while.
And this was at least 15 years before somebody decided that people really needed to know what their dinner looked like. Right. Yeah. Gerber isn't just tossing random stuff out here.
No, he's not. Oh, it's great.
Next, we get the Narcissiverse.
This was weird.
Yeah. Existence is a herd marathon full of sweat and fury and looking good, and when you hit the wall, you fall and get eaten.
Give me your interpretation of what you see.
I was afraid you were going to ask that. I mean, it's people who are... Jesse, sometimes subtlety and symbolism go right over my head. My reflexes are not fast enough to catch it. But, I mean, a herd marathon, so people, I mean, it seems like people exercising, doing all this stuff, and not taking the time to enjoy it. Image is everything, and, keeping up your appearances and killing yourself to do it, and for what?
Do you think that they ran off of the cliff?
Oh, yeah.
What do you think? Okay, so they ran off the cliff.
Well, it's a herd marathon. I got the impression of lemmings.
Lemmings, right? All right, this next one coming up though, this one's fun.
The 976-averse, where free floating strangers are linked in perpetual conversation without content. Now, I know this was premium phone lines at that point. It certainly has nothing to do with social media these days. Not relevant at all.
No. Of course not. Of course not.
Did you catch the little jab at DC Comics in there?
Did I ever? That was in my notes. Is Robin dead yet?
They had the phone number you could call to determine if Jason Todd lived or died.
Exactly.
Then we fly into the Noriega-verse.
I have no idea what's going on here other than everybody looks like George Bush and Noriega, and people have pineapples for heads. No idea what the reference.
I mean, I remember the name, but I don't.
I would have to go
my historical ignorance here. This was real world happenings, not Howard the Duck and She-Hulk. So I am not. I mean, I understand. Noriega was a dictator, and the government was involved. Yeah, the more I say, the dumber I sound.
Yeah, I'm right there with you.
I need to refresh my memory of actually, it's not even that recent a history. But then they come out in merry old England, finally start to put, well, I won't say 2 and 2 together because this doesn't add up, but...
no way.
We get, the critic finally gives up and just says, heck with it, I am interfering.
Yeah, I think he had enough.
Yeah. Dr. Angst is filling in his plan, explaining how all this comes together, and 6, the band of the bland on the heroes, flying to them with the hoary haberdashery of the Vitoli. VTOL, vertical takeoff and landing.
Nice.
Yeah, and sets up a showdown where that actually makes sense. And this actually goes to probably my favorite panel. I know this isn't unspoken issues, so we're not picking panels for each issue, but probably my favorite panel in the entire 4 issues is when the critic is explaining that the only places exempt are the most mundane spots in existence. The look on Howard's face when he realizes it's Dr. Angst.
Oh, yes.
Like, you will believe a talking duck can experience emotion. I mean, that panel, even though he's squishing the universe, I didn't think of Dr. Angst as much of a threat until I saw the look on Howard's face.
Right.
And that made all this absurdity real. I mean, as real as it can be. But I mean, that panel is just, it's so simple, but it's just Howard's figuring it out. And he's like, oh no, I know what's going on here.
Do me a favor and tell me, how would you say Howard the Duck's catchphrase?
What? It's like a despairing quack, I guess. Yeah, and so you get the fight, and you're like, well, hey, they've got the critic, he's got the power of a watcher, and the black hole's just like, nope. So then you get the battle, and it's hard to believe these guys would lose track of Howard the Duck, but apparently the spanker really wants to punish old ladies who dress like flirtatious teeny boppers.
That's hilarious. Like, that's his favorite thing to do, too. Like,
yeah, Howard thinks she probably deserves a good whacking. On the other hand, Spanker's enjoying it way too much.
The spanker.
He doesn't like her, but Howard knows the right thing to do.
The spanker with his, what is it? Hold on. His discipline report? Is that what it was?
Oh, yeah, instead of the war journal.
This discipline report in the paddle van. Oh, man. Yeah, and it's funny, like, this weirdo obsession of the black hole wanting to, like, suck the Dodge in.
Yeah.
Like, I want to get that Dodge. I want to get it. He's like, one fin in, baby. I got one fin in.
and then the critic is not impressed. He says his greatest aspiration was to ingest a Dodge, and ambition as limited as his imagination. And then the critic gets what I could only hope would become his catchphrase: "Suck hot cosmos, stooge." Dr. Angst just happened to have the one villain with the power to undo his entire plan.
It all went so perfectly. This was a treat, man. I had a great time reading it. I really did. A lot of fun stuff. This has sold me on Steve Gerber. If I get the chance to read anything else by him, I know it doesn't sound like it's going to be too hard to find anything. I feel like this was something that, hit all the right spots for me to make me go, man, this is a writer that I heard a lot about, and the reputation preceded him appropriately.
Well, and I mean, check out the original Howard the Duck. This is a lot of what you will get in original recipe Howard the Duck.
I like it. Original recipe is probably not a good way to describe.
Oh gosh, there was actually one of the comedy what ifs that said, what if Howard was different types of birds, and one was chicken, and it was just a bucket of KFC.
Oh no.
Yeah.
No. Any idea who wrote that what if?
I'm not sure. That one had a bunch of different people. I think it was volume 2, number 34. That was the all comedy issue.
Fantastic.
Oh my gosh, it's one of my favorite comics.
Is that the Watcher with the skirt blowing up?
Yes. Yeah. What if
I know that.
Watching the Watcher? The main story is what if Thanos turned Galactus into a human? And long story short, with the Infinity Gauntlet, Thanos banishes Galactus to Earth, turns him into a human. That human just happens to be the spitting image of Elvis Presley. So Galactus must decide whether he wants to return to his destiny as the devourer of worlds, live on Earth with Elvis's second lease on life.
All right. She-Hulk, the Cosmic Squish Principle. What a fun time here. Evan Bevins, anything left unsaid before we get into plugs?
I mean, just, like you said, this makes you want to read more Steve Gerber. I've read a lot of Steve Gerber. This makes me want to read even more. I mean, it's just utterly absurd, and yet there's an intelligence, there's a wit. It's not just let's throw the dumbest thing out there and see if we can get you to spit out your drink. There's emotion, there's character, it's tweaking comics, but also, taking full advantage of the conventions of comics. Just loads of fun. I want to read. They don't have his entire run of She-Hulk on Marvel Unlimited yet, so these are. I always thought the She-Hulk series was, pretty funny. The 3 or 4 issues I had, this is a whole nother level. So this has gone on my list of things to hunt for at cons and comic shops.
Yeah, issue 18.
Mm-hmm.
The Sensational She-Hulk, featuring Dr. Doom's fifth cousin.
Yeah, I mean, it on Marvel Unlimited, it jumps from 17 to 24. Which Hitch is still drawing it, but Simon Furman's the writer, and she's taking on Death's Head.
Oh, wow.
Speaking of 90s characters, I probably at this point wouldn't turn down any Sensational She-Hulk issues I saw, but the Gerber issues especially are going on the to get list.
For sure. All right, man. Well, let's go ahead. We'll get into plugs. I had a great time. What do you got going on? Plug that blog that you didn't plug earlier.
Yeah. Asterisk51.blogspot.com. I do have some even more of my musings about these issues. I did a weekly series on it, to coincide with She-Hulk airing on Disney Plus, and also a breakdown of the She-Hulk the movie issue and how it has absolutely no similarities to present day hijinks with superhero movies, and especially not Batgirl.
Oh yeah,
not at all related. It's not a money-making plot by a nefarious studio head. I'm not saying the guy at Discovery Plus or whatever is nefarious, but
Oh, I hear you.
There are some parallels. I'm getting back. I was delayed a little bit in my Secret Defenders read through, but Jesse, you'll be happy to know that the next installment of that is on the way and features Doctor Strange passing the torch to Dr. Druid, and one of the weirdest sights I've ever seen in comics, Doctor Strange with no facial hair.
Whoa, look out. Oh, I can't wait to see that.
Yeah.
It'll be fun.
Pretty crazy. And then from there you'll occasionally get some reviews or discussions on the various and sundry movies you can find at Dollar Tree these days. Just watch
Nice.
Stardog and Turbo Cat with my youngest, and that is definitely a movie that I have paid for and seen.
Check and check.
Just all kinds of weirdness. It leans a little heavily Marvel. There's other good stuff in there. I do have another podcast I can plug. I don't have one, but I was a guest over on the Magazines and Monsters channel, The Brave and the Bob, talking about, speaking of Batgirl, an issue of Brave and the Bold, where Batman has to deal with not only a new criminal mastermind in town, but the competing affections of Wonder Woman and Batgirl, and one of the more inconvenient love triangles you've ever seen.
All right. Well, hey, ladies and gentlemen, you can check out the Source Material Comics podcast right here on the Source Material Comics podcast feed. I have the Sensational She-Hulk slated down here for October 25th.
Okay.
By this time, then, folks, you should be able to go back and find the Unspoken Issues epic podcast. It's 4 parts, folks. 4 parts. Nice little tiny introduction, part 0, that's happening on the 10th of October. And then part 1, 2, and 3 of the Unspoken Issues coverage. 18 chapters of Unity. If you don't know much about Valiant Comics, tune into that intro episode. I'm going to give you an idea and a lowdown of all the characters you're going to get in Unity. And then we talk about the story for 3 solid days straight. No, it's not that long. It's just, it's about an hour and a half a piece, but 3 days, one right after the other, you will be able to download a podcast of our discussion of those 18 chapters. And it was a ride and a half, and I can't believe we actually put everything together. And I'm pretty proud of it. This is, you'll notice the production factor has upped its game in those episodes, because I'm doing synopsis, post-edit with background music going on. But previous to this, you should be able to hear Mark and I discuss the DC event World War III. And Mark said, I need to talk about Black Adam. What's the best thing to talk about Black Adam? I don't know. Let's pick an event that happened like right at the end of the 52 event. With that being said, I want to thank Evan Bevins coming on here to the Source Material Comics podcast, bringing a little bit of Steve Gerber along with him. And I am Jesse Starcher. We'll be talking to you guys soon. Have a good one. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining us. All of this would not be possible without W2Mnet.com, so make sure to seek them out for more podcasts. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please feel free to share, and we look forward to entertaining you again soon.